Modern monetary theory for beginners in plain English, with the jargon stripped out. Right now, the US Treasury's own debt to the penny figures put the national debt at about $39.9 trillion. Around 32 trillion of that is held by the public. The rest the government owes to itself. There is a group of economists who look at that number and say the fear attached to it is aimed at the wrong target. By the end of this, you will know what those economists actually claim, where the idea came from, and who the people behind it are. You will also know what happened when 42 of the most respected economists in America were asked to vote on it. That vote is the part most explainers leave out. It arrives about 6 minutes from now, and the result is cleaner than you would expect. The awkward part is that two things are true about the same idea. A sitting Federal Reserve chairman went on the record calling it just wrong. A former Treasury secretary called it a recipe for disaster in the Washington Post. And that same idea produced a best-selling book and a senior advisor seat on a presidential campaign. There is also a second question sitting underneath all of it, and it decides whether this thing is describing the world or arguing for a policy. I will come back to it, because that distinction is where most of the shouting comes from. Start with where it came from, because the name misleads in two directions at once. It is not modern, and it is not a theory in the sense of a prediction you can test in an afternoon. The trail runs back to a hedge fund manager called Warren Mosler. In 1993, he self-published a short paper called Soft Currency Economics. He was not an academic. He moved money for a living. He watched how Treasury payments actually cleared, and he came away convinced the textbook description did not match the plumbing in front of him. From the mid-90s, a group of academics picked it up. Bill Mitchell in Australia gave it the name. L. Randall Wray worked on it at the Levy Institute. Stephanie Kelton, now at Stony Brook, became its most public voice. Add Pavlina Cherneva, Matt Forstater and Scott Fulwiller, and you have most of the founding roster. They point backwards too. Their own citations run to Georg Friedrich Knapp, a German economist who published The State Theory of Money in 1905, to Abba Lerner and something he called functional finance. To Wynne Godley's work on sectoral balances, the ideas are old, the packaging is new. That is the first thing worth getting straight. Now the mechanic itself, which is where this either clicks or it does not. Modern monetary theory splits the world into currency issuers and currency users. You are a currency user, so is a business, so is the state of Ohio, so is Greece inside the euro. You have to get hold of dollars before you can spend them. Run out and you default. That constraint is real and it is total. The federal government, in this description, sits on the other side of that line. It issues the dollar, it borrows in the dollar, it lets the dollar float against other currencies. Ray's argument is that the government in that position cannot be forced into defaulting on a debt denominated in the thing it creates. Notice the wording. Cannot be forced. Choosing not to pay is a different matter, and the debt ceiling fights in Congress are exactly that kind of choice. For you, that means something specific. The household comparison you have heard 1,000 times, where the government balances its books like a family at a kitchen table, is the exact comparison this framework was built to reject, which leads to the strangest claim in the whole thing, and the one that draws the most abuse. Modern monetary theory says taxes do not fund federal spending. That sounds like nonsense on first hearing. The reasoning behind it is older and stranger than the slogan. It traces back to Knapp and to the chartalist tradition Ray writes about in a paper called Money and Taxes. The chartalist approach. The question chartalism asks is why a piece of paper with no metal behind it has any value at all. Its answer is that the state manufactures the demand. The state requires you to settle your tax bill in dollars and will accept nothing else. So you need dollars. So dollars have value. Follow that through and the sequence flips. In this account, the government spends the currency into existence first, then taxes some of it back out. Taxes still matter enormously here. They create the demand for the currency and they pull spending power out of the economy. What they do not do in this telling is act as the pot the spending comes out of. That is the claim. Whether it is a useful way to describe a real economy is the fight, and we are getting there. So if the money is not the limit, something has to be. The answer this framework gives is inflation and real resources. Kelton describes it as replacing the budget constraint with an inflation constraint. Her book, The Deficit Myth, came out in 2020. The argument runs like this. What limits government spending is what the economy can physically produce, not the accounting behind it. Idle workers, empty factories, spare capacity. Spend into that and you get output. Keep spending once it is used up and you get price rises instead, which means the government in this framework has to pull spending power back out once capacity is reached, raise taxes, cut spending, or watch prices accelerate. That is a constraint with teeth in it, and it is the part that vanishes when people summarize the theory as a free lunch. One policy comes attached, and it does not really separate out. Cherneva, Ray, and Kelton all argue for a job guarantee, a standing government offer of work at a fixed living wage open to anyone who wants it. Their case for it is not mainly about welfare. The pool grows automatically in a downturn as people take the offer, and shrinks in a boom as private employers hire them away. So it moves against the cycle without anyone having to vote on it. And because the wage is fixed, they argue it puts a floor under wages that does not drift. Critics push on that from both sides. Some argue it is an enormous new federal program wearing the costume of a stabilizer. That one is genuinely unresolved. Now the part I promised you, which is what the economists who do not buy any of this actually said. February the 26th, 2019. Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, testifying to the Senate Banking Committee. His words, the idea that deficits do not matter for countries that can borrow in their own currency, I think is just wrong. A week later, on March the 4th, Larry Summers went further. The former Treasury Secretary wrote in the Washington Post under the headline, "The left's embrace of modern monetary theory is a recipe for disaster." He called it fallacious at multiple levels and pointed at governments abroad that tried something like it and got wrecked. Elsewhere he reached for the phrase voodoo economics. Kenneth Rogoff at Harvard published his own piece that same month. He called it modern monetary nonsense. The titles were not subtle. Then the number. In March 2019, the IGM Forum at Chicago booth put two statements to its panel of 42 leading economists, picked to span the ideological spectrum. The first, that countries borrowing in their own currency need not worry about government deficits. The second, that such a country can finance as much real spending as it wants by creating money. Agreement with either statement? 0%, not a low number. 0. On the first, 72% strongly disagreed and the remaining 28% disagreed. On the second, it was 76 and 24. You will not find many questions in economics that come back that clean. And this is where that second question comes back. Because the economists behind the theory look at that survey and say it does not measure what everyone thinks it measures. Their objection is about the wording. They argue they never wrote that deficits do not matter. Their published claim is narrower, that the binding constraint is inflation rather than insolvency. Ask any economist whether deficits are free, and of course the answer is no. The authors of this theory say their answer would be no as well. So the survey result is real, and the objection to it is real at the same time. 0 out of 42 agreed with those two sentences. Whether those sentences fairly summarize the theory is a separate argument, and it is still running. That gap between what a theory says and what its critics hear it saying is most of why this topic generates so much heat. Both sides reach for the same two examples, so they are worth knowing. Japan first. Gross government debt somewhere between 207 and 230% of GDP in 2026, depending on whose measure you use. For roughly 2 decades, average inflation barely above zero, 10-year bond yields close to zero, and no shortage of buyers for its government debt. The theory's authors point at that and say the collapse everyone predicted never turned up. The honest caveat sits right next to it. That era has ended. Japan has had real inflation since 2022, and the Bank of Japan has been raising rates again. Which side that helps depends on which claim you thought Japan was proving. The second example is the American inflation of 2021 and 2022. Critics treat it as the live test the theory failed. Its authors answer that the pandemic packages were crisis policy, pushed out at speed, never assessed for inflationary effect the way their own framework demands. Both readings are on the table. I am not going to tell you which one to take. So where does that leave the thing you came here to settle? Modern monetary theory is a description of how a sovereign currency system operates, bolted to a set of policy proposals, and the two get argued about as though they were one object. The descriptive half, that a currency issuer faces a different constraint from a currency user, is less controversial than the noise suggests. Plenty of mainstream economists accept the plumbing. The contested half is what follows from it. Whether inflation can be steered through fiscal policy in a legislature that moves slowly, whether a job guarantee anchors prices or blows a hole in the budget, whether calling the constraint inflation instead of solvency changes what a government actually does when it is tempted. On that half, the professional consensus runs against the theory, and the Chicago Booth number is the cleanest evidence anyone has of it. The theory's authors say that consensus is answering a caricature. That argument has been running for 30 years and it is not finished. One sentence to take with you. The core claim is that a country issuing its own floating currency is constrained by inflation and real resources rather than by running out of money. And the profession overwhelmingly rejects the version of that claim it has been asked to vote on. Knowing that much puts you ahead of nearly every argument you will see about it, because most of them are two people using the same three words to mean different things. One question for the comments, and I would like a specific answer rather than a general one. Of everything here, which single claim did you find hardest to accept? The taxes one, the issuer and user split, or the job guarantee? Tell me which, and tell me what specifically did not sit right.